رب محمد صلى عليه وسلم نحن عباد محمد صلى عليه وسلم.
When discussing Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah ta'ala in relationship to the revival of Tassawwuf, it is essential we understand the basic concept of Tassawwuf. Sidi Ahmad al-Zarruq rahimahullah ta'ala, the author of Qawaid al-Tassawwuf, a book written on the rules and regulations of Tassawwuf, mentions that the numerous names of Tassawwuf have only been given because Tassawwuf itself is so vast, and when something, a subject matter, is so vast, numerous names are given to that subject matter, alluding to the vastness of that subject. Tassawwuf can be likened to a building with numerous doors, and each person, each aspirant of the way of Tassawwuf enters through a particular door and therefore defines that subject in accordance with the door he entered through. And when defining Tassawwuf, people have given different definitions. If you check works like Hilyatul Awliya of Al-Asfahani, Abu Nu'aym Al-Asfahani rahimahullah ta'ala, you will find when giving the biographies of different masters of this discipline, they would give different definitions of the same thing. Different definitions of the same thing would point out to the vastness of the subject. When we draw an analysis of the revival of Tassawwuf in the works of Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah ta'ala, and how Tassawwuf was exemplified by him, we realize that there are many facets, many aspects of Tassawwuf which Imam Ahmad Rida Khan brought our attention to, and this is summarized in his famous fatwa which he gave when asked regarding an aspirant, a person who wants to traverse the way of Tassawwuf, Ihsan. Does this person need a guide, a murshid, a spiritual guide, and will he attain salvation without a guide? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ وَسِيلًا, seek towards him a means. So therefore, the question is, when a person aspires to take up the way, the spiritual way of wayfaring, in going on the path of spirituality, does he need a spiritual guide? Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah ta'ala states that Shihabuddin al-Saharwardi rahimahullah ta'ala, the author of Awarif al-Ma'arif, stated, سمعت كثيرا من المشايخ يقولون من لم يرى مفلحا لا يفلح. I heard many of the guides, the scholars, the mashayikh state that the one who did not see a successful person, muflihan, will never become successful. This statement is something positively attributed to the scholars. And what is mentioned from Abu Yazid al-Bistami rahimahullah ta'ala, he quotes the famous work of Imam al-Qushairi rahimahullah ta'ala, simply known as Risalat al-Qushairiyya. روي عن أبي يزيد أنه قال من لم يكن له أستاذ فإمامه الشيطان, that it has been related from Abu Yazid al-Bistami rahimahullah ta'ala, whoever does not have a leader, a guide, then his leader becomes shaitan. This has also been reported from Al-Imam Abu Yazid al-Bistami rahimahullah ta'ala. Another example of this is this quote being from Risalat al-Qushayriyah: يجب على المريد أن يتأدب لشيخ فإن لم يكن له أستاذ لا يفلح أبدا. It is essential upon the seeker of the spiritual path أن يتأدب لشيخ, to take the mannerisms of a spiritual guide. فإن لم يكن له أستاذ, if he has no teacher, فإن لم يكن له أستاذ لا يفلح أبدا, he will never be successful. هذا أبو يزيد يقول من لم يكن له أستاذ فإمامه الشيطان. So Al-Imam Abu Yazid al-Bistami rahimahullah ta'ala is telling us, the one who does not have a spiritual guide, his guide becomes shaitan. Further down, Al-Imam Ahmad al-Khan rahimahullah ta'ala states, quoting, again this is a quotation: سمعت الأستاذ أبو علي الدقاق يقول الشجرة إذا نبت بنفسها من غير غارس فإنها تورق ولكن لا تثمر. كذلك المريد إذا لم يكن له أستاذ يأخذ منه طريقه نفسا فنفسا فهو عابد هواه لا يجد نفاذا. This quote means that I heard Abu Ali al-Daqaq, one of the sages, the Sufi masters, state that a tree, if it grows itself, الشجرة إذا نبت بنفسها من غير غارس, without someone nurturing the tree, without a planter, someone who plants the seed and overlooks the growth of the tree, فإنها تورق, it will give leaves. If such a tree will give leaves, but لا تثمر, it will not give fruit. The tree will give leaves but no fruit. He states, drawing a similitude between the two cases, that in the same way the spiritual aspirant, the murid, if he does not have a teacher who he takes the spiritual path from, soul from soul, nafsan for nafsan, then he is a worshipper of his desires, and he will not find nafadhan, meaning a way out of this, meaning of worshipping his desire. This is something established from the Sufi masters. Explaining this, Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that every believer, Muslim, who has the creed of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, his salvation is not dependent upon giving the oath of allegiance to a guide. If someone has the correct creed, his salvation, which salvation? General salvation from the hellfire, is not dependent upon giving his hand in oath of allegiance to a spiritual guide. To the extent that he mentions that people who live in mountains where the message of Islam has not reached them and they are not familiar with the prophethood of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the rational faculty, they will attain salvation also. This is the position of the school of Imam Muhammad bin Mahmud Abu Mansur al-Maturidi rahimahullah ta'ala, that someone must know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the rational faculty. So, what is meant by salvation in the previous quotes? In the previous quotes we mentioned that a person, an aspirant, a seeker of the spiritual path shall not be successful unless he has a spiritual guide. What is meant by this success? It is clearly not salvation in the sense that the person will not attain salvation from the hellfire. In order to elucidate this point, we have the hadith that when people will be placed in the hellfire, including Muslims, sinning Muslims, they will be punished in the first level of the hellfire. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam will intercede on their behalf. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will perform the prostration in front of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, saying, Ya Muhammad, irfa' ra'saka wa qul tusma' wa sal tu'tahu wa shfa' tushaffa'. O most praised one, raise your blessed head, irfa' ra'sak, wa qul tusma', and say and you will be listened to. Or plead, and your plea will be heard. وَسَلْ تُعْطَهُ, and ask, and you will be given. Intercede, and your intercession will be accepted. In other wordings of the same hadith, we have مَا زِلْتُ أَتَرَدَّدُ عَلَى رَبِّي فَلَا أَقُومُ فِيهِ مَقَامًا إِلَّا شَفَعْتُ حَتَّى عَطَانِيَ اللَّهُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ أَنْ قَالَ أدخل من أمتك من خلق الله من شهد أن لا إله إلا الله يوما واحدا مخلصا ومات على ذلك. This intercession of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioned, mass transmitted, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will state that I shall keep going to my Lord. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from direction. So this would mean the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would plead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam will have a station known as Maqam al-Mahmud, the praiseworthy station. And he will intercede, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will order the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to take out of paradise and take out of hellfire and make those who have been taken out of hellfire, place them in paradise. The wording is أدخل من أمتك من خلق الله. Min أدخل means enter those from the creation of Allah. Which people? من شهد أن لا إله إلا الله يوما واحدا مخلصا ومات على ذلك. So this is conditional. What is it conditional on? يوما واحدا, that they bore witness to this fact, and after bearing witness to this لا إله إلا الله, they were sincere, مخلصا ومات على ذلك, and they died upon that also. So it is conditional, مخلصا, and in some hadith the wording is وصدقا, truthfully from the heart. If someone says لا إله إلا الله and passes away on that, they will enter paradise. Remember, this refutes the claim of some that anyone who says La ilaha illallah, even if they are not truthful, they will attain salvation. They are taking the outward wording of the hadith, Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. Whoever says La ilaha illallah enters paradise. But other narrations of the same hadith mention the condition, mukhlisan, meaning with in sincerity, and others mention sidqan, truthfully, and وَمَاتَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ, and he passes away on that, meaning he does not commit disbelief. Saying La ilaha illallah would necessitate also believing in Sayyiduna Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. As mentioned by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala and Ibn Hibban, the authority of Sayyiduna Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Shafa'ati liman shahida an la ilaha illallah mukhlisan wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So saying Sayyiduna Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and believing this is also a condition for entering paradise. And then we know the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which mentions شَفَاعَتِي لِأَهْلِ الْكَبَائِرِ مِنْ أُمَّتِي. When you go through Babu Salam in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwarah, Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi, you enter Babu Salam to give salutations to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When walking through the hall towards the blessed resting place of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you will notice on the left hand side there is an inscription of a hadith on the side of Riyadh al-Jannah with the same hadith. Shafa'ati li ahli al-kaba'ir min ummati. My intercession is for the people of major sins from my nation. So this guarantees salvation even for people of major sin, meaning even if someone is a sinner, they are still guaranteed salvation. In one wording of the hadith, خُيِّرْتُ بَيْنَ الشَّفَاعَةِ وَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَدْخُلَ شَطْرُ أُمَّتِ الْجَنَّةَ فَاخْتَرْتُ الشَّفَاعَةَ لِأَنَّهَا أَعَمُّ وَأَكْثَرُ تَرَوْنَهَا لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ الْمُتَّقِينَ لَا وَلَكِنَّهَا لِلْمُذْنِبِينَ الْمُتَلَوِّثِينَ الْخَطَّائِينَ. The hadith states that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, I was given a choice between intercession and half my nation, شطر أمتي أن يدخل شطر أمتي الجنة, which means that half my nation enter paradise. I chose intercession. Why? Because the intercession is inclusive, أعم وأكفى, and sufficient. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, do you see that this intercession is only for the believers who are pious? No, it is for the sinners, al-mudnibin, al-mutalawwithin, who have polluted themselves, al-khatta'in, who have been doing wrong. So this intercession of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam guarantees salvation for all believers. To the extent that Al-Quran Al-Kareem mentions that there will be those sinners that have committed so many sins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, out of His divine mercy, will still make those sins into good deeds. فَأُولَٰئِكَ يُبَدِّلُ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ حَسَنَاتٍ. They are those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has changed their sins to good deeds. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forgiving and merciful. So, Al-Imam Ahmad Rida Khan rahimahullah ta'ala mentions, when those pious people have said that the one who does not have a guide, they will not be successful, what is clear that they do not mean that if a person does not have a murshid khas, a specific guide, a very specific guide, he will not attain salvation. No. If a person is on the correct belief, the correct creed, he will attain salvation. This salvation is referred to as falah, zahir, apparent salvation. Why is this termed apparent salvation? Because the person is not punished. The body is not punished. But a person should not be mistaken that by performing outward actions, actions of the body parts, and avoiding the actions of the heart, a person will not attain salvation, meaning removing the ailments, the diseases of the heart, a person cannot attain salvation. So he states regarding this, that outward salvation, attaining outward salvation, does not mean that a person does actions which are outwardly good, but yet the heart is diseased. So he mentioned some of the ailments of the heart. From amongst those ailments, he mentions riya, which is ostentation. Remember, the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that actions are by intentions. So if a person's intention for any action is for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those actions which are outwardly religious, then they have spoiled the action and they have not attained piety, outward piety. Al-Hafiz Ahmad bin Hajar al-Haythami, rahimahullah ta'ala al-Makki, he has a famous book known as Al-Zawajir an Iqtiraf al-Kabair, a 2-volume book in which he lists all the ailments, the illnesses of the heart as well as the sins, the outward sins. And he mentions in the introduction that in the beginning of this book I shall place the ailments of the heart first. Why? Those diseases of the heart are worse than the sins of the outward. If someone drinks alcohol, his sin is momentary, meaning it lasts for a short while. He drinks alcohol, he becomes intoxicated, and then the state of intoxication goes away. And remember, the angels write down the sin only after 6 hours after a person has performed the sin, in case he may repent. But the illness of the heart is such an illness that a person carries that illness in the heart at all times. So he's continuously sinning. So Al-Hafiz Al-Haythami rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that it is very important to place the ailments of the heart first, so a person can rid himself of those ailments. And remember, the ailments of the heart are to do with Islam, meaning the practice of Islam a person should avoid. This is not advanced ihsan or tasawwuf. These are the basic aspects of Islam, to avoid the ailments of the heart. So he mentioned the first one as being riya, ostentation, showing up. A person invalidates all his actions if he is doing something out of riya. In the same way, and before people enter the spiritual path, they should learn these ailments of the heart and learn the cure to those ailments also, before even entering a spiritual path, or before claiming to be a wayfarer on the spiritual path. He mentions al-ujbu, self-conceit. This is when a person considers himself better than others. He mentions al-hasad, which is envy. When you see the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on fellow believers, and you wish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remove those favors from them, that is known as al-hasad. This is haram, prohibited. In the same way, he mentions rancor, hatred for other Muslims. In the same way, takabbur, arrogance. Arrogance towards Muslims. Arrogance towards creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the same way, he mentions hubbul madhi, which is love of praise. That the soul, the ego, wants praise. So this is something that the ego demands from a person. This is an ailment, a disease of the heart. In the same way, hubbul jah, which is love of status. A person would want status amongst others. Now this can have a religious aspect to it, that a person can want a status amongst religious people, but it can also happen, generally it happens in worldly things, but it also happens amongst religious people. In the same way, muhabbatu dunya, love of the world, having love of worldly things in the heart. In the same way, talabu shuhra, seeking fame. This is an illness of the heart. In the same way, ta'zeem al-umara wa tahqir al-masakin, venerating the rulers and deeming the believers, the poor people as deeming them as being something low, tahqir, ignoble. In the same way, ittiba'u shahwat, following the desires. Shahwat is in reference to the carnal desires, going out of the parameters of the Sharia and following those carnal desires. In the same way, he mentions pretentiousness. This is what we call flattery. When someone meets someone, in order to attain something or to gain favor with that person, you become pretentious. You may praise that person in order to flatter them. This is haram, it is prohibited in Sharia. In the same way, kufran ni'am, rejecting the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or not thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the favors He has given us. In the same way, hirs, coveting. Coveting is a greed for things. And also bukh, which is stinginess. Remember, this should not be mixed with israf. Israf is wasting. But bukh is love for wealth and wanting to keep wealth when it should be spent. In the same way, tulul amn, which is having long a desire for, and tulul amn is thinking that you will stay on earth forever and maybe you will repent one day. This is a sin. For a person to do so, he's falling into fooling himself, thinking he will live forever, and maybe he will have a chance to repent and he continues sinning. In the same way, su'ul dhann, having bad thoughts about other Muslims without any strong grounds, I mean, not on a strong basis, having bad thoughts towards other Muslims. In the same way, inadul haqq, rejection of the truth. When the truth is presented, a person rejects the truth. In the same way, israr ala al-batil, staying firm on falsehood. When the truth is presented, a person rejects it as an element of the heart. In the same way, makr, deceit, makr, also plotting and planning against other Muslims. Ghadar, which is treachery and khiyana. And in the same way, ghafla, negligence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, qaswatul qalb, hardness of the heart. In the same way, he mentioned tamalluq. Again, I mentioned flattery. Tamalluq can also fall under flattery and pretentiousness. I'timad ala al-khalq, reliance upon creation. Having lack of reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and relying upon creation is an element of the heart also. In the same way, nisyanul khaliq, forgetting the Creator. In the same way, nisyanul maut, wa jur'atun ala Allah, forgetting death and being daring towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that doing things openly, sinning openly. In the same way, nifaq, hypocrisy. The nifaq meant here is nifaq amali, meaning saying one thing and doing another. In the same way, ittiba'u shaytan, following the way of shaitan. And he mentions being a slave of the ego. In the same way, rughba, being drawn towards worldly things, and batala, which is being lazy from worship. This is an element of the heart. Remember, the ulama mentioned if someone finds worship difficult, he should read in abundance, La ilaha illallah. When reciting in abundance, La ilaha illallah, this removes any laziness from the heart. The heart will encourage the person to worship. In the same way, karahatul amal, disliking action. And he mentions other things like qillatul khushu', lack of humility, and ghadab for the ego, anger for the ego, when a person becomes angry for the ego. These elements, he lists in total 40 elements, but the number of elements are not limited to these 40. So he states that outward actions of Islam are attached to these, removing these elements from the heart also. A person should not think that they act on the outward actions of Islam, and the heart is filled with diseases and ailments, and they do not have to remove these ailments from the heart. Now, further down he mentions the similitude of this like a tent which is placed over impurities. You may have impurities, you place a tent over the impurities, the khayma. A tent would seem fine from the outside, but if someone enters the tent, they find all this putrid smells and waste inside of the tent. In the same way that the person who may outwardly seem fine, the heart may be diseased, his likeness is, in other books they give the example of an egg which is rotten. If you break the shell of the egg, the inside is putrid. So these elements of the heart are essential upon every Muslim to learn the definition of that ailment and the cure to that. Al-Imam Ahmad al-Khan rahimahullah ta'ala states that even the ulama, even the scholars, very rarely amongst them you will find someone who opposes those diseases of the heart, even the scholars. So a person should not think that if they have a figure, a public figure, a scholar or a preacher or someone who gives lectures, that that person has rid himself of these ailments. No, this is not essential. It is very rare to find an individual who has purified himself from all these traits. He mentions, as an example, a group of people in his time, and indeed we find them in our time, that when they are corrected on creed and aqidah, when they are corrected on issues of creed, they become musir, meaning obstinate upon falsehood. This is an example of an illness of the heart, an ailment of the heart. And he mentions that in his time, when he refuted some of the deviants in his time, those people spread false information regarding him, publishing false information about him in newspapers. And he mentions that this is the worst type of illness, because the person is obstinate upon falsehood. So that would count also as an illness, an ailment of the heart. Especially when you have claimants to the Sufi path, when they are corrected on their falsehood, a person who is actually upon the way of the Sufis, he should be the first person to acknowledge his mistake and correct his mistake. So, he mentions that a person who avoids major sins and avoids being obstinate upon minor sins, this person will attain salvation. And even those Muslims who are sinners, even we said, remember, in every age they mention that there are about 110,000 people who have attained wilayah, which is closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we look at 1.6 billion Muslims and 110,000 people who have attained wilayah, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would not say that the 1.6 billion Muslims have not attained salvation. No, they will attain ultimate salvation. But those 110,000 and more, a few more than that, have purified themselves of these ailments of the heart. And they have attained a salvation which is referred to as falahul taqwa, the successfulness of piety. That the first success we mentioned was falahul zahir, outward success. This is attained by every Muslim believer, even if he is punished for those illnesses of the heart. But yet, a Muslim should never have despair from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We mentioned that some believers, their sins will be turned into good deeds, and they will eventually enter paradise. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, my intercession is for the people of major sins from my nation. So if people of major sins are entering paradise, they will attain falahul zahir as long as they remain in Islam. So here at this point he mentions an example of how a person can rid himself of ailments of the heart. An example of that is, for instance, if a person fears himself having the ailment of jealousy, al-hasad, then he does not follow upon that jealousy. How is jealousy caused? Jealousy is sometimes caused by anger. If a person has anger towards an individual, that anger can develop into jealousy. So if someone develops jealousy to another Muslim, he should not act upon that jealousy, meaning saying things out of jealousy, or doing things against that person out of jealousy. In the same way, if a person has bad thoughts towards another Muslim, he does not go ahead and investigate those bad thoughts. In the same way, if someone has the habit of being stingy, he should go out and spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So each ailment of the heart has a cure. And this is essential knowledge upon every Muslim to learn the definition of the ailment, the definition of the disease of the heart, and the simple cure. This knowledge is taken from the ahadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the reports from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and have been famously compiled by people like Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. Then he mentions that remember I said earlier that the second type of salvation is falah al-taqwa. Falah al-taqwa in relationship to the first type, which is falah zahir, outward salvation. Every person is guaranteed outward salvation. But there are some people who will enter paradise without hisab, without account. That is falah al-taqwa. But then there is another category which is mentioned as being falah batini, the inward salvation. Now after someone has attained outward piety, so a Muslim who learns his basic aqidah, he reads a work like Al-Aafiyah Tahawiyah with a teacher, he learns his basic creed of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, he learns his basic fiqh jurisprudence from a teacher, and then he learns about the ailments of the heart, maybe reading the summary of the Ihya Ulumuddin with a teacher. If he acts according to this, he has attained falah al-taqwa, successfulness of piety. Note that he would need a teacher, know that. But there is something known as falah batini, successfulness of the inside. This is when a person has rid himself of all the ailments of the heart. He attains a spiritual rank which the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. That you worship Allah as you see Him, as if you see Him. And if you do not see Him, then know He sees you. He observes you, subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is exemplified or defined by some as being لا مقصود إلا الله. There is no purpose, maqsood, only Allah. لا مشهود إلا الله. There is nothing witnessed, only Allah. And the third stage, لا موجود إلا الله. There is nothing existing necessarily except Allah. Because everything else exists as a possibility. But the only existence which is necessary is the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is spiritual wayfaring. So many times people confuse Islam with Tassawwuf. What I mean by Islam is the outward actions of Islam, like the removing the elements of the heart. This is Islam. Some people tend to think that to remove the illnesses of the heart, they must take the spiritual path. No. To remove the illnesses of the heart, you must be a good Muslim. The spiritual path takes a person to the stations which we just mentioned. These spiritual stations, a person needs a guide. to guide him through those spiritual stations. But remember, when I said Islam and Tasawwuf as being two separate things, I do not mean that the two are divorced. No. You cannot have the spiritual path without Islam. So the point I'm trying to make is a person cannot enter the spiritual path until he has acted upon Islam completely. Meaning he has the correct belief, he follows the outward actions of Islam, but the outward actions of Islam would include removing the ailments of the heart, the diseases of the heart. So with regard to this journey, the spiritual journey, Imam Ahmad al-Khan rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that there is falah, success, and this success would mean that a person is saved from the hellfire. This is general to all believers. But there is a success which is referred to as falahul ihsan, which we mentioned as being falah batini. The success of the station of excellence. The station of excellence, a person attains success in that. What will this lead to? This would lead to being from amongst those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That behold, surely the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will have no fear and neither shall they grieve. This success, attaining this success, is through the spiritual path. A person who takes the spiritual path, especially in our day and age, many people take the spiritual path, but they become conceited. They have self-conceit. They deem themselves better than other believers. But they have fallen into a deception. That deception is that for a person to have al-ujb, self-conceit is one of the major sins. So they have not reached maqam al-ihsan, the rank of perfection, the rank of ihsan, which is beautifying their Islam. They have fallen into the mistake of muddying their actions of Islam. In the same way, Imam Ahmad al-Khan rahimahullah ta'ala further gives more light on this fatwa, stating that a person without a teacher, whether success is the first type or the second type, that person will never be successful. Meaning, if someone goes to learn Islam without a teacher, would he attain salvation? No. In the same way, if he goes onto the spiritual path, will he attain salvation? No. So for both of these, a person needs a guide. If someone does not have a guide to teach him the correct creed, a guide to teach him fiqh, and remember, with the first type of success, would he need one teacher or can he have multiple teachers? With the first type, question, how many would he need? Is he limited to one? No. If a person has multiple teachers, this is permissible. To learn Islam, to learn Islam, Aqidah, belief, to learn about the ailments of the heart, to correct those ailments of the heart, a person can go to multiple teachers as long as they have the correct belief. And as mentioned by the scholars of Ilm al-Kalam, is it permissible for a Muslim to blind follow in his faith? Do we blind follow like the Christians? No, we do not blind follow the clergy when it comes to faith. Iman, every Muslim must learn the basics of Islam without blind following the clergy. So, attaining a teacher on the second, which is falah al-ihsan, the spiritual wayfaring. When a person takes a spiritual guide in that is referred to as a Shaykh al-Khas, a specific teacher, as opposed to the first. The first is a Shaykh al-Am, a general teacher, who teaches you Islam, teaches you correct belief, teaches you rulings, teaches you the elements of the heart and how to kill those elements. But the second, which is falah al-ihsan, a person has a Shaykh al-Khas, a specific guide. This is when people take the oath of allegiance with someone and they enter what we know as a tariqah, the spiritual path. These turuq paths have different names. You have Naqshbandi, Chishti, and many other Qadiri, many other paths with different names. When a person takes a guide from these spiritual paths, that guide is referred to as al-murshidul khas, the specific guide. Now, with regard to this specific guide, he mentions that the spiritual guides, which are murshid khas, are also divided in two types. You have Shaykh Ittisal, the connected Shaykh, and Shaykh Isal, the one who connects. A distinction between the two. One is connected and one connects others. So if someone gives the oath of allegiance to the first type, which is known as a Shaykhul Ittisal, the connected Shaykh, Al-Imam Ahmadullah Khan rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that he has some conditions. Firstly, that this Shaykh that a person believes will take him on the spiritual path is referred to as Shaykh Ittisal. By the way, this fatwa was misquoted by someone also. How was it misquoted? That they don't mention the Shaykh Isal and what taking the Shaykh Ittisal entails. Taking the Shaykh Ittisal does it entail that a person will attain Falahul Ihsan? Does it mean that? No, it doesn't. If someone has Shaykh Ittisal, it does not guarantee him to have Falahul Ihsan, success in the station of Ihsan. So the conditions are four for a Shaykh Ittisal. Number one, that that person has a connected chain back to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anyone who takes the oath of allegiance with a spiritual guide, that spiritual guide must have taken the spiritual path with a spiritual guide. That spiritual guide must have taken the path from a spiritual guide. This continues with connection all the way back to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Otherwise, you have numerous people. The father was a spiritual guide. The father passed away, and the son claims that he took the spiritual path from his father. This would lead to the spiritual path being the pathway here being defunct. I mean, there is no spirituality because there is a gap, a lacuna in the chain. There is a gap, and therefore there is no spiritual sustainability for that spiritual path. And this happens throughout the Muslim world. If you go to many claimants to spirituality today, you investigate their chain, you will find that many of them claim that they took the spiritual path from such and such person or from their father, but when you look deeper into those claims, you will find that there is a gap in the chain. Or it is not proven that the person may have studied the spiritual path or traversed the spiritual path under those whom he claims he has traversed the path with. In the same way, he mentions that the person you take the spiritual path with must be sahihul aqidah, meaning his creed must be correct. So what does this entail? Before anyone decides to take the spiritual path with an individual, he must know his own creed. So what tends to happen in this day and age is that people do not know their basic creed. They do not know their basic fiqh, rulings, jurisprudence, what they need to know. They do not know about the ailments of the heart, yet they are recruited into a tariqah, into a group, and they are told to follow a spiritual guide. They will stay with that spiritual guide for many years. They will never learn their creed. They will never learn their fiqh rulings. In fact, they go to others to learn these things. And in many cases, rather than curing those spiritual elements of the heart, those ailments are enlarged in that group. For instance, they become rivals to another group. or they start having riya, ostentation within that group. So this is something to analyze before taking the spiritual path. We would have to analyze whether the chain of the claimant is connected. We would have to analyze, is he correct in his belief? So in order to know that, you need to know your own belief. And thirdly, you would have to analyze, if I join this group, how am I benefiting? Am I joining this group so I can attain a rank in the group? Is the spiritual guide encouraging a competition amongst his students? This is what tends to happen. Sometimes the claimant to spirituality encourages the elements of the heart amongst his students in order to use those elements towards his advantage, like taking money and different types of abuses that take place in these groups. The third point that is mentioned is that the person is an alim, a scholar. What is the meaning of a scholar? That he's able to take his essential beliefs from the sources of Islam independently, without the help of another scholar. This is the meaning of a scholar. Beliefs and teachings of Islam, being able to access those beliefs and teachings from the sources of Islam without the help of anyone else. This is the meaning of a scholar. So how many Sufi orders we have in our midst that claim to follow the Sufi path, yet the spiritual masters are unable to do this? They would not fall into even the category of Shaykh Ittisal. Then the fourth point which is mentioned by Imam Ahmad al-Bakhan rahimahullah ta'ala, that the person is not a fasiq mu'lim. Fasiq mu'lim is someone who breaks the divine law openly, meaning he does not follow the Sharia. If he does so, he is not fit enough to be Shaykh Ittisal, the connected Shaykh. These are the conditions of a Shaykh Ittisal. If we observe anyone who claims to be a spiritual guide, we would have to ask them, or their students, is your guide a Shaykh Ittisal or is he Shaykh Isal? If he is Shaykh Ittisal, then does he fulfill these four conditions? And we would have to observe, does this person have a connected chain? Does he have knowledge? Does he have the correct creed? And does he break the laws of Sharia? Then if they claim he's Shaykh Isal, he would have to fulfill these four conditions and more conditions. Those conditions, Imam Ahmad al-Bakhan rahimahullah gives an example of Imam al-Zayla'i rahimahullah ta'ala, who states that regarding a person who is a fasiq, a person who breaks Sharia, في تقديمه للإمامة تعظيمه وقد وجب عليه الإهانة شرعا. That by placing a fasiq, a person who breaks Sharia, forward to lead the prayer is impermissible. Why? Because legally speaking, it is essential for people to do his ihana. Ihana means the opposite to ta'zim, opposite to reverence, meaning not to revering. So by placing him forward to lead the prayer, you are revering him. So he's saying that if a person who commits transgression is unfit to lead the prayer, how would such a person be fit enough to lead others in the spiritual path? We have many claimants to the spiritual path today. They do not fulfill these four conditions, yet they do not claim to be Shaykh Ittisal. They claim to be Shaykh Isal. And in many cases, they claim to be the Ghaus, the pole saint. The Ghaus, the main saint of his time, or Al-Qutb, the pole saint. Or they claim to be Abdal from the 40 saints. And so many different titles that are given to them. So it is essential upon us to be vigilant and observe, does this person fulfill these four criteria? But at the same time, he should not fall into the mistake of observing these people to take out their faults. This is also a mistake. And Imam Ahmad Zarruq, rahimahullah ta'ala, in the beginning of Uddatul Murid al-Sadiq, a book he wrote on the Sufi path, he mentions in the inside cover that do not read this book to take out faults out of others. Because if you are doing this, then you are falling into the trap of shaitan, which is one of the major sins, to have bad thoughts about other Muslims. We only observe these people when they attempt to recruit us. In many cases, they will come to our masajid. They especially come to the masajid of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah from the subcontinent. Why? Because the Indian subcontinent has preserved, in the most part, the traditional Sufi path. And the people are still aware of what Tassawwuf is. Therefore, they term this congregation as flock. I don't like using the word flock, because a flock is made from sheep. But we are told that we do not do taqleed in our aqidah, so we are not sheep. But they attempt to recruit people from the Indian subcontinent, mainly because our people are open to the concept of Tassawwuf. And secondly, because of money, because our people give money generously. So, when we have these claimants of Tassawwuf, we should observe, do these people fulfill the conditions of Shaykh Ittisal, which are these 4 conditions? As for Shaykh Isal, which is the other category, Al-Imam Ahmad Khan rahimahullah ta'ala mentions that that person must have, apart from these 4 conditions, he must also be a master of knowing how to deal with people, knowing the trickery of shaitan and the ego, and being able to give the relevant cure to every individual. So people claim to be Shaykh Islam, they must be very good at looking at every aspirant, every student, and being able to pinpoint the particular problem of that person and taking them through the spiritual path. Remember, Imam Abdul Wahhab al-Sha'rani rahimahullah ta'ala has a book known as Mawazin al-Qasirin min Shuyukh wa Muridin, which is a short book where he places stringent conditions on a Shaykh al-Isal. He places very stringent conditions that if someone were to read that book, you would be very surprised at the conditions he places, but we will not go into that. But Al-Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala places 15 conditions on a Shaykh al-Isal. Al-Imam Ahmad Khan rahimahullah ta'ala very quickly goes through what a Shaykh al-Isal is, a Shaykh who makes others connect to the spiritual path. After this, he mentions that the oath of allegiance, bay'ah, which is given in this day and age, bay'ah which people give in this day and age, he mentions that these bay'ah, these oath of allegiance, are 2 types also. How many people here have given bay'ah, oath of allegiance, to a Sufi guide? Put your hand up if you have. How many of you have been told what type of bay'ah this is? Very few people. This tends to happen in some Sufi orders today, that the spiritual guides do not tell the aspirant that in reality he is not doing suluk. The oath of allegiance that he is taking is for barakah, blessings. So Imam Ahmad Khan rahimahullah ta'ala states that the first type of bay'ah is bay'atul barakah, which is for taking blessings from the silsila. This is only if the spiritual guide has those 4 conditions. When he fulfills those 4 conditions, the aspirant takes the oath of allegiance. When he takes the oath of allegiance, this is for blessings. How does he attain blessings? That spiritual guide is connected to his spiritual guide. That spiritual guide is connected to his spiritual guide, all the way back to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the source of blessings. And these blessings pass down. So this bay'atul barakah for blessings. But Al-Imam Ahmad Khan rahimahullah makes a very special note here, that this bay'ah would only be valid if the intention is valid. If the intention is for a worldly benefit, then the bay'ah does not count. So many people will give the oath of allegiance just to make business contacts in the particular tariqah, silsila, in the particular silsila, to make business contacts, or worldly contacts, or to get married, or to remove a jinn. If they have some people need exorcism done, so they join the tariqah. But in many cases, those orders are not able to help them, and then they leave. So this taking barakah, bay'atul barakah, is permissible, based upon the hadith, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever imitates the people is amongst them. The mistake many people make today is that they enter a silsila. If that silsila fulfills the 4 conditions, they have entered it for barakah, blessings. The mistake they do is that they think they are entering the silsila as a salik, and then they think of themselves as being better than other Muslims, and they fall into a greater mistake. What the vast majority of us must realize is that those who have taken the spiritual path are in fact those people who have taken bay'atul barakah, the people who have taken the oath of allegiance for blessings. When a person realizes this, they will not fall into self-conceit. And this is only when the Shaykh has those 4 conditions. Otherwise, many claimants to the Sufi path today do not even fulfill those 4 conditions when we analyze them. So he quotes again Shihabuddin al-Saharwardi rahimahullah ta'ala from Awarif al-Ma'arif, stating, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْخِرْقَةَ خِرْقَتَانِ خِرْقَةُ الْإِرَادَةِ وَخِرْقَةُ التَّبَرُّكِ والأصل الذي قصده المشايخ للمريدين خرقة الإرادة وخرقة التبرك تشبه بخرقة الإرادة فخرقة الإرادة للمريد الحقيقي وخرقة التبرك للمتشبه وللمشبه به ومن تشبه بقوم فهو منهم. Here it states that know that the khirqa, which is the garment which is placed, khirqa, what they do in the Sufi path is when someone takes the spiritual path, they place a garment, a cloak over them. This is passed on from, they say, from Al-Imam al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala. So they refer to this as khirqa, taking the spiritual path. This is divided into 2 types. Khirqatul irada, which we would say bay'atul irada, entering the spiritual path with the intention of doing suluk, wayfaring. And the second one is khirqatul tabarruk, entering the spiritual path for blessings. He states the original principle which the mashayikh would intend for the seekers was khirqatul irada. Which one? Khirqatul irada. And as for khirqatul tabarruk, taking the spiritual path for blessings, then what they intended by this is imitating the real aspirants, the real murideen. He states that the khirqatul irada was intended lil murid al haqiqi, for the real murid. So people who have taken the oath of allegiance to any shaykh, they must firstly look as to whether that shaykh is shaykh al-tisal, which is the minimum condition. And then they must analyze the oath of allegiance that they have taken. Is it for blessings? This is based upon yourself, your own station. But if the shaykh is shaykh al-tisal, by default your bay'ah, your oath of allegiance will be for barakah. If the shaykh is not shaykh al-tisal, then you are not a salik. The real salik is the one who does suluk with the shaykh al-tisal, which the conditions for that are very stringent. A shaykh al-tisal is the likes of a Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiyallahu anhu. So, to summarize this speech, remember that for the conditions for the shaykh al-tisal, what were mentioned was that he has a connected chain, he has knowledge, he does not have open transgression, But what was also mentioned was Sahih al-Aqidah, that he has correct belief. And in order to determine whether the person is correct in belief, a person needs to learn his creed himself. How can you observe others, the creed of others, and analyze the creed of someone else if you do not know your own creed? So Aqidah is very essential. And Imam Ahmad Khan rahimahullah mentions those people who in his time have taken students, but yet their creed is corrupt. They have taken students for the spiritual path, yet their creed is corrupt. But further down in the fatwa, he mentions also the spiritual aspirant who gives bay'ah, oath of allegiance, to a Shaykh Isal, a connecting Shaykh. If the aspirant is true, al-muridu sadiq, the true murid, and the Shaykh fulfills the conditions of being a Shaykh al-Isal, this is the spiritual path with regard to which the scholars said, Man la shaykha lahu fa shaytanu shaykhuhu. Whoever does not have a shaykh, a guide, then shaitan is his guide. And the example of this, the shaitan attempting to deviate someone, was when a Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu was in the wild, in the wilderness, and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and shaitan appeared, illuminated, and said, I am your Lord and you are forgiven from everything. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu read La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah and sought refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then shaitan attempted to deviate him again, saying, you have been saved by your knowledge, meaning your knowledge of Tawheed. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu read La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah again, because the source of his guidance is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not his knowledge. This is in reference to the spiritual path. If someone does not have a guide on this spiritual path, he is misguided. But the mistake many people have fallen into in this day and age is that the spiritual guides they have taken do not fulfill even the conditions of a Shaykh Isal, and they themselves have not removed the ailments of their heart, and they enter a spiritual path, and then the result is what we see, that we have claimants today to Tassawwuf that are what people refer to as Sufi cults in our midst. These Sufi cults, in fact, do not exemplify real Tassawwuf and have been one of the major causes for many people leaving the fold of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. It is only until we bring out the true and correct teachings of